When we think about slavery in America, most of us picture the same images: cotton fields in the South, white plantation owners, and the brutal treatment of African Americans. But there's a chapter of American history that rarely gets discussed in classrooms or documentaries. A story that challenges everything we thought we knew about who owned slaves and who didn't. What if I told you that some of the most prominent slave owners in American history weren't white at all? What if the very people we often think of as victims of European colonization were themselves deeply involved in the buying, selling, and owning of human beings? This isn't some fringe conspiracy theory or revisionist history. This is documented fact that historians have been studying for decades, yet somehow it remains hidden from mainstream conversation. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most controversial and complex topics in American history: the story of Native American slave ownership. By the end of this video, you'll understand not just how widespread this practice was, but why it happened, which tribes were involved, and how it shaped the very foundation of our nation in ways most people never imagined. But before we go any further, let me be crystal clear about something. This isn't about pointing fingers or assigning blame to any particular group. History is messy, complicated, and often uncomfortable. What we're about to explore happened in a different time, under different circumstances, with different moral frameworks than we have today. The goal here isn't to judge, but to understand. So let's start with the basics. Slavery among Native American tribes didn't begin with European contact. Long before Columbus ever set foot in the Americas, various tribal nations had their own systems of captivity and forced labor. When rival tribes went to war, the victors would often take prisoners. These captives might be adopted into the tribe, used as laborers, traded to other groups, or sometimes killed in ritualistic ceremonies. This traditional form of captivity was vastly different from the chattel slavery that Europeans would later introduce. Native American captives often had pathways to freedom, could sometimes marry into their captors' families, and their children weren't automatically born into bondage. It was brutal, yes, but it operated under entirely different rules than what we typically think of as American slavery. Everything changed when Europeans arrived with their own twisted economic system built on human bondage. Suddenly, there was a new kind of slavery in the Americas, one based purely on race, designed to be permanent and structured to generate maximum profit. And here's where our story gets really complicated. Some Native American tribes, particularly those in the southeastern United States, began adopting European-style slavery. They started purchasing African slaves from white traders, establishing plantations, and building their own wealth on the backs of enslaved people. These weren't just isolated incidents or individual choices. We're talking about entire tribal governments that legally recognized and protected the ownership of human beings. The numbers might shock you. By the 1830s, the Cherokee Nation alone owned nearly 1,500 enslaved people. The Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Seminole tribes also became major slave-owning societies. These 5 groups became known as the 5 Civilized Tribes, a name given to them partly because they had adopted so many European customs, including the ownership of slaves. But why did this happen? Why would Native Americans, who were themselves facing displacement, violence, and cultural destruction at the hands of Europeans, choose to participate in enslaving others? The answer lies in survival, adaptation, and the brutal realities of colonial America. Many tribal leaders believed that by adopting European ways, including slavery, they could protect their people from removal and destruction. They thought that if they became more like white Americans, they would be treated as equals and allowed to keep their lands. They were building cotton plantations, writing constitutions, establishing schools, and yes, buying slaves, all in hopes of securing their place in this new American society. It was a calculated gamble that ultimately failed. Despite their efforts to assimilate, these tribes were still forcibly removed from their ancestral lands during the Trail of Tears in the 1830s. And when they were marched west to Indian Territory, they brought their slaves with them. The irony here is staggering. These Native American nations were simultaneously victims of American expansion and perpetrators of human bondage. They were being stripped of their rights while stripping others of theirs. They were fighting for their freedom while denying freedom to thousands of African Americans. The legal frameworks these tribes created around slavery were remarkably sophisticated and disturbingly comprehensive. The Cherokee Constitution of 1827 explicitly prohibited freed slaves from settling in Cherokee territory without permission. Mixed-race children born to Cherokee fathers and enslaved mothers were considered free, but children born to enslaved fathers remained in bondage regardless of their Cherokee ancestry. The Choctaw went even further, creating laws that prevented any black person, free or enslaved, from owning property within their borders. Meanwhile, white men who married Choctaw women could become citizens with full property rights. The message was clear: racial hierarchy mattered more than tribal membership. But perhaps the most revealing aspect of Native American slavery was how it exposed the complex racial dynamics of the antebellum period. These tribes weren't just copying white practices, they were often more restrictive than their white neighbors. Some Cherokee slave owners refused to allow their slaves to learn to read or write, viewing education as a threat to the social order they were trying to maintain. The economic incentives were undeniable. Cotton was king in the early 1800s, and slave labor made cotton cultivation incredibly profitable. Native American planters accumulated substantial wealth through enslaved labor. Some of the wealthiest individuals in Indian Territory were mixed-race tribal members who owned dozens of slaves and operated large plantations that rivaled anything in Georgia or Alabama. Christian missionaries who worked among these tribes often found themselves in impossible positions. They came to spread the gospel, but encountered Native American Christians who saw no contradiction between their faith and owning other human beings. When missionaries began preaching against slavery, they were frequently asked to leave tribal lands. The tribes wanted Christianity, but only the parts that didn't threaten their economic interests. The stories of individual enslaved people in these communities reveal the human cost of this system. African Americans owned by native tribes often faced unique challenges. They were isolated from other black communities, struggled with questions of identity and belonging, and had limited opportunities for escape since they were surrounded by tribal territory, rather than neighboring states with different laws. Some enslaved people found ways to navigate this complex world. They learned tribal languages, participated in cultural practices, and occasionally gained positions of trust within their owners' households. A few even achieved freedom through military service or by purchasing themselves. But these success stories shouldn't obscure the fundamental reality that thousands of people remained in bondage. The Civil War brought this entire system crashing down, though not immediately and not without significant resistance from the tribes themselves. When the Confederacy courted Native American allies, they found willing partners among the slave-owning tribes. The promise of continued slavery was a powerful incentive for these nations to join the Confederate cause. After the war ended, the federal government demanded that all tribes free their slaves and grant them citizenship. The response varied dramatically from tribe to tribe, revealing deep divisions that would persist for generations. Indeed, persist for generations. So what do we make of this complicated legacy? The story of Native American slave ownership forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature and historical complexity. It shows us that oppression and survival often create moral compromises that seem unthinkable from our modern perspective. These tribes weren't inherently evil, nor were they simply victims. They were people making impossible choices in an impossible world. This history matters because it reminds us that the story of American slavery was far more complex than we usually acknowledge. It involved people of all races, all backgrounds, all circumstances. It shows us that when systems of oppression exist, they corrupt everyone who participates in them, regardless of their own experiences with injustice. Perhaps most importantly, this story teaches us that historical understanding requires nuance, empathy, and a willingness to sit with uncomfortable contradictions. The Native Americans who owned slaves weren't monsters, but they weren't heroes either. They were human beings caught in a web of circumstances that pushed them toward choices we can barely comprehend today. The next time someone tries to simplify American history into neat categories of good guys and bad guys, remember this story. Remember that real history is messy, painful, and filled with people who were simultaneously oppressed and oppressor, victim and perpetrator. Only by understanding this complexity can we truly learn from our past and build a better future.